She was zip-tied to a cargo strap in the back of a dying military helicopter. That's how they transported her. Not in a seat. Not with a briefing. Zip-tied to the wall like a duffel bag with a heartbeat, while 8 of the most decorated operators in the theater traded glances over their rifles and called her the package like she wasn't even breathing the same recycled air. The pilot was dead. The co-pilot had 3 minutes of consciousness left, maybe less. The helicopter was falling, and the only person in that aircraft who knew how to stop it from killing everyone aboard was the woman they'd been treating like cargo. If this story grabs you from the first second, hit follow, drop a like, and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me. Every second of this matters. The briefing lasted 4 minutes. That was how long it took Colonel Harwick to reduce Rhea Dalton to a single sentence. Civilian contractor, intelligence asset, non-combatant, do not engage in conversation, do not allow near equipment, deliver intact to Firebase Kestrel. Intact. Like she was a hard drive. Like she was a manifest entry on a transport ledger. Grant Sloan stood in the cramped ops tent at FOB Anvil and studied the woman sitting across the folding table. She hadn't been introduced. She hadn't spoken. She sat with her hands folded in front of her, a canvas bag between her boots, watching the wall behind him with the particular stillness of someone who had learned a long time ago that staying invisible was a survival skill. She was maybe 35. Brown hair pulled back with zero style, like she'd done it in the dark and didn't care. A faint scar ran along her left jawline. Not fresh, years old, the kind that comes from something fast and close. She was dressed in contractor khakis. Nothing tactical, nothing that announced capability. Her boots, though, Sloan caught it before he looked away. Her boots were worn in a specific pattern. Outside heel, middle ball. The gait wear of someone who'd spent time in aircraft. Someone who'd spent a long time sitting in seats that vibrated. He'd filed it away, then dismissed it. He shouldn't have. "Ma'am." He said it the way officers say it when they don't mean it as courtesy. "You'll be seated in the rear cargo section. One of my men will brief you on emergency procedures." She looked at him for the first time. "I know the emergency procedures," she said. Her voice was quiet. Not soft. Quiet. The way a room gets quiet before something happens. Sloan nodded once. "Good. Stay in your seat." She went back to looking at the wall. The MH-60M lifted from FOB Anvil at 2247 local, blacked out, running NODs and terrain-following autopilot through the mountain corridors of Ashkar province. The valley below was the kind of darkness that had no floor. Villages without power, roads without markings, a landscape that absorbed light and gave nothing back. Sloan sat across from his team and ran his thumb along the selector of his HK-416 out of habit. 7 operators plus himself. Staff Sergeant Deke Morning on comms, already monitoring 3 frequency bands. Corporal Yusuf Adebayo cleaning a suppressor thread with the focused serenity of a man who cleaned suppressors the way other men prayed. The rest were variously sleeping, staring at screens, or doing the things soldiers do on night inserts, becoming very still and letting the noise fill in around them. The package sat zip-tied to a cargo strap in the starboard corner. Not literal zip ties. A single canvas restraint across her lap, standard issue for non-tactical passengers. But the effect was the same. She was behind them, contained, categorized. The team had barely looked at her since liftoff. Deke's voice came through the internal channel. "We've got elevated chatter on band 3. Somebody's moving out there." "Direction?" Sloan asked. "South of the corridor. Could be nothing. Could be a shift change." Deke paused. "Or they know the route." Sloan keyed the pilot's channel. "Ramrod, you copy that chatter?" "Copy." Chief Warrant Officer Finch had been flying Ashkar Province for 14 months. His voice had the flat cadence of a man who'd stopped being surprised. "Adjusting heading 5 degrees east, adds about 4 minutes." "Do it." The helicopter banked. Below, the black ridges scrolled past. The engines hummed in a specific frequency that Sloan had stopped hearing consciously 3 deployments ago. It was just background now, the sound of not being on the ground. He didn't notice when that frequency changed. The first RPG went wide by 40 feet. The explosion bloomed orange and immediate off the port side, close enough that the pressure wave rocked the fuselage. Sloan was out of his seat before the echo died, grabbing a door panel while his team surged awake with the trained violence of men yanked from light sleep into combat in under 2 seconds. "Contact left," somebody shouted. Adebayo already at the door gun. "Ramrod, break right, break right." The second RPG didn't miss. It detonated against the undercarriage. Not a direct hit, glancing, partial detonation. But it tore through the hydraulic lines running along the belly and sent shrapnel through the cockpit floor. Sloan heard the pilot's voice cut off mid-sentence. He heard the co-pilot, Torres, make a sound that wasn't words. The helicopter lurched. Not the controlled lurch of evasion, the lurching of a thing that had forgotten what it was supposed to do. Sloan pulled himself forward. "Ramrod, status!" He got to the cockpit door and pushed through and saw Finch slumped against the side window, a long piece of metal through his shoulder and into his neck, blood black in the instrument light. Torres had both hands on the controls, shaking, his face sheeted with blood from a cut above his eye, his eyes wide and moving too fast. "I got it," Torres said. "I got it. I got it. The airspeed indicator spun. The altitude was wrong. The heading was wrong. Torres didn't have it. Sloan grabbed his shoulder. "Torres, talk to me. Hydraulics are... I can't... The pedals aren't..." Torres's hands were rigid on the cyclic. "Commander, I can't feel the tail." Sloan understood what that meant. He'd done enough hours in enough aircraft to understand that when you couldn't feel the tail, you were in the early stages of a process that ended in a spin. A flat spin over mountain terrain, blacked out, in hostile airspace, with 7 of his people in the cabin. He keyed the team channel. "Who's got flight hours?" Silence. Real silence. Not tactical quiet. The kind that happens when nobody wants to be the one who says no. "Anyone, fixed wing, rotary, doesn't matter. I've got 20 hours on Cessnas." That was Kowalski. "That's it." More silence. Sloan turned back to the cockpit. Torres was fighting something losing a grip on him. The cyclic movements were getting smaller, more desperate, the kind of micro-corrections a pilot makes when they're out of real options and running on reflex. "We're going to hit the ridge," Torres said. "Commander, we're..." "How long?" 7 minutes. 6. I don't..." A sound from somewhere in the airframe, metal under tension. "I don't know. The hydraulic pressure is dropping. When it goes, we go. 6 minutes. Sloan went back to the cabin. He didn't look at her first. He looked at his team, at their faces, at the door guns, at the equipment lashed to the floor. He took exactly 2 seconds to assess what he had. 8 people. Limited ammunition after whatever that engagement had cost them. Deke bleeding from the hand where shrapnel had found him. The rest functional. 1 dead pilot, 1 dying aircraft. He was about to start running options when she spoke. "You're losing tail rotor authority." He turned. Rhea Dalton was not zip-tied to anything anymore. She was standing, not in a combat posture, not squared up, just standing with one hand on the cargo net and her head tilted slightly, the way someone tilts their head when they're listening to something below the human range of hearing. "Sit down," Sloan said. "The hydraulic system that controls your anti-torque pedals runs parallel to the main line," she said, like he hadn't spoken. "It's a dual-path system on the M model. When one path bleeds out, the other holds for a while. Torres is fighting the secondary right now." She paused. "He's going to lose it in about 4 minutes." Sloan stared at her. "And when he does," she continued, voice level, precise, nothing performed about it, "the fuselage will begin to rotate right. He'll try to compensate with collective, which will make it worse. You'll enter a clockwise spin, from the ground, your left, and you'll impact the eastern ridge at somewhere between 80 and 100 knots. Nobody in the cabin moved. "You won't feel it," she said. That's not comfort. That's physics." Sloan stepped toward her. "Who the hell?" "The eastern ridge is 4.5 miles out," she said. "At current airspeed and the rate Torres is losing authority, we have 5 minutes. Maybe 6. She looked at him with an expression that wasn't cold so much as stripped down. No performance, no apology, no request for permission. "You need to let me into that cockpit." Sloan's jaw tightened. "You're a contractor." "I know what I am." "You don't have clearance to..." "Grant." It was Deke from the comms station. His voice was careful. "She's right about the hydraulics. I can hear it." "Deke, She's right. Quieter. Like he didn't want to say it. I can hear the pitch changing. Sloan looked at the door to the cockpit. He looked at his team. He looked at the woman standing in the middle of the cargo bay of a dying military helicopter in hostile airspace with her hand on a cargo net and her eyes on him. She wasn't asking. She hadn't been asking this whole time. She was just waiting for him to stop being the obstruction. Sloan stepped aside. She moved past him without a word. Torres heard the cockpit door and turned his head, pale, blood in his eye, hands white on the controls. Who? Slide right, she said. What? I need the left seat. Slide right. I can't let go. I've got it. She put her left hand over his on the cyclic before he'd agreed. He felt the hand and something in him, some animal thing running underneath the training, believed it. He slid. She settled into the left seat and spent exactly 3 seconds orienting, not hesitating, orienting. The difference mattered. Her eyes moved across the instrument panel the way eyes move across something familiar, in the dark, not searching, finding. Her right hand found the collective. Her feet found the pedals. How bad? She asked Torres. Pedals are... I'm getting maybe 40% authority. It keeps fluctuating, she finished. Right, I feel it. Her hands adjusted. The helicopter, impossibly, steadied. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in films, some sudden surge of competence overwhelming chaos. Just steadied, incrementally, the way a steady hand steadies water in a glass. Torres watched her. Who are you? She didn't answer. Through the cracked windshield, the mountain ridges were black walls on both sides. They were in the corridor now, committed to the heading. The valley narrowed ahead. She keyed the internal channel. Commander Sloan? Here, we have 2 options. Option 1, I push for altitude, try to clear the eastern ridge, buy your extraction team time to intercept. We'll be exposed and above the engagement ceiling the whole way. There's about a 40% chance this airframe holds together long enough. She paused. Option 2, I take us lower. There's a canyon system about 2 miles south, the riverbed run. It's tight. We'll be in effective range of ground fire the entire length, but it keeps us below radar and below the ridgeline. It buys us distance instead of altitude. What's the survival math on option 2? Better, she said, but it's not good. Sloan didn't hesitate. Do option 2. Copy. She banked left. The canyon came up fast, a black slot in the terrain that looked, from altitude, like a crack in something solid. She took them down hard, nose pitched forward, trading height for velocity, and the ridges rose on both sides until the stars above them narrowed to a strip. The team felt it. The change in the air, the way sound behaved differently when you were canyon running at night. The echoes came back wrong, compressed, like the walls were too close and getting closer. Contact below! Adebayo was at the port gun. Vehicles, 3, maybe 4. They're pacing us. She didn't react to that. Her attention was distributed in a specific way. Part of it on the instruments, part of it on the canyon geometry unfolding in the NODs, part of it on the sound of the engines. She had divided herself into the aircraft. The way you divide yourself into a thing you've done so many times, your body stops asking for instructions. Sloan, I need suppression left and right. Anyone they can put on those walls will complicate us. You heard her, Sloan said into the team channel. Door guns, left and right. Keep those vehicles behind us. The guns opened up. The canyon filled with the sound of it. The spinning bark of the miniguns. The echoes bouncing back, magnified. The vehicle headlights scattering below as the convoy tried to reposition. A rocket went up. She saw the signature before she heard it. A bloom of white in the nods, off the right wall, angled forward. She didn't think. She banked left, hard, more than the aircraft wanted, more than the hydraulics approved of, and the rocket went past close enough that Torres flinched from the light. The maneuver worked. The tail rotor did not approve. She felt it immediately, a change in the vibration signature, subtle. The kind of thing you only catch if you're already listening for it. She eased the bank, checked the instruments. The tail rotor RPM was fluctuating in a new pattern. We've got a problem, Torres said. He'd felt it too. I know. She didn't elaborate. She was running math, airspeed, distance, the rate of the fluctuation, the valley they needed to reach. How long to the riverbed? At this speed, Torres looked at the nav screen. 6 miles. Maybe 8. She looked at the instruments. We won't make it to Firebase Kestrel, she said. What? The tail rotor. It's going. She kept her voice the same. We need a landing site short of the objective. I need the terrain map. Torres pulled it up. She studied it for 3 seconds. The dry riverbed, she said. South of the Valley Junction. It's 6 miles short of Kestrel. That's still... I know where it is, she said. I know what it is. She keyed the team channel. Commander, we're landing short. The riverbed at grid. She read the coordinates from the nav screen. Prepare for a hard landing. Brace positions on my mark. Sloan came back immediately. How hard? She looked at the instruments, at the pressure gauges, at the tail rotor RPM still spiraling in the wrong direction. Hard, she said. They came out of the canyon at low altitude with the engines at max power, and the tail rotor giving them maybe half of what they needed, and the dry riverbed showing up in the Nodies as a pale stripe through the darkness. She reduced power. The helicopter began to descend. Torres was watching her hands. Later, days later, when he was asked about it, he wouldn't be able to explain exactly what she was doing differently from what he'd been taught. Same inputs, roughly. Same sequence. But there was a quality to it that he couldn't name, like the difference between someone who could read music and someone who could play it. What's your approach speed? He asked. Too fast, she said. Can't help it. The tail, I know. The right engine coughed. Not a stutter, a cough, a deep structural sound that meant something had moved that wasn't supposed to move. Right engine, Torres started. I hear it. She scanned the panel, oil pressure dropping, temperature climbing. The right engine was about to give them everything it had for the last time. At 60 feet, it quit. The helicopter dropped. Sloan felt it in his gut before he registered it consciously. That stomach-lifting sensation of free fall in an enclosed space, of something that was supposed to be holding you up deciding not to. He grabbed the cargo net. Around him, his team grabbed whatever was close. Deke's voice came over the channel, completely flat. Brace for impact. In the cockpit, she dropped the collective. Completely, fully, the way you only drop collective if you know what comes next and you're committed to it. The rotor went into auto-rotation, windmilling, gathering RPM from the airflow, storing up energy that didn't exist anywhere else in the aircraft. 60 feet, 40 feet. The riverbed was pale gravel, pale sand, the bones of a watercourse that hadn't seen rain in years. 20 feet. She pulled, hard, both hands. The collective coming up fast, the stored rotor energy converting into lift for a single, brief, real moment. Not enough to arrest the fall, not enough to make it survivable the way people mean when they say survivable, but enough. A second and a half. The helicopter hit the riverbed. The landing gear buckled first, then the right side. The fuselage tilted, and the main rotor clipped the ground, and the entire aircraft rotated 90 degrees and slid on its side across the gravel, sparks tracing a line across the dark, a sound like the earth itself protesting. When it stopped, there was a moment, a single moment, of absolute silence. Then someone in the cabin said, "God!" and someone else started coughing. Sloan hit the quick release on his harness. He was moving before the dust settled, pulling people out of the tilted cabin, checking faces, counting. Torres had a broken arm. Adebayo had hit his head on something. The rest were cut, bruised, one man limping, but on their feet. Functional. 7. 8. He counted 8. Then he counted the cockpit. She was still in the left seat, hands still on the controls, head down. For a moment his chest went cold. Then she lifted her head, blood on her forehead from where it had hit the panel, both hands still gripping what used to be the controls of a flying thing. She looked at the fractured windshield. She looked at the pale gravel 3 feet below the cracked glass. She released the controls. Her hands were shaking, just slightly, the way hands shake when they've been locked around something for a long time, and suddenly there's nothing left to hold. She noticed him noticing. She closed her hands into fists. "Everyone out?" she asked. "Everyone out," he said. She nodded. "Good." She climbed out of the seat. The team set up a perimeter in the dark without being told. This was what operators did. The automatic deployment of training in the absence of orders. Everyone finding their angle, their field of fire, their sector. They were alive and they knew it, which meant their bodies had already moved on from the crash and started calculating the next threat. Sloan stood at the edge of the riverbed and keyed his radio. Kestrel Base, this is Ironclad. We are down at... He read the grid. Non-hostile landing, all personnel accounted for. 1 KIA pilot. Requesting emergency extraction. How copy? Static. Then through it. Ironclad Kestrel reads you. Extraction package is en route. ETA 12 minutes. Hold position. 12 minutes? He could work with 12 minutes. He turned to find Rhea standing near the wreck, one hand pressed flat against the fuselage. Not leaning on it, just touching it. The way you touch something that carried you when you get a moment to acknowledge it. You're bleeding, he said. I know. He watched her for a moment. Where'd you learn to... Where's your medical kit? She asked, not looking at him. He pointed. She went. Sloan stood alone at the edge of the riverbed and looked at the wreck of the helicopter that was supposed to be flying all of them safely to Firebase Kestrel, and he thought about the 4-minute briefing that had given him a name and a category and nothing else, and he thought about what it cost a person to stay quiet about what they knew. When staying quiet was the only way they'd learn to survive. He didn't have a framework for it yet. He would later, but right now he had 12 minutes and a perimeter to run. He was halfway back to the team when Deke grabbed his arm. Commander? Deke's voice had changed. Sloan stopped. Deke was pointing west. Not at the mountains, at the sky. 2 lights, low, moving in circles. Not friendly. Those are scouts, Deke said. Somebody knows where we are. Sloan looked at the lights, at the wreck, at the 12-minute window that had just become something else entirely. Then he heard it. Beneath the rotors, beneath the wind, beneath everything, engines, on the ground, getting louder. The engines didn't have a direction yet. That was the worst part. Sound traveled wrong in canyon terrain. It bounced off rock faces, folded back on itself, arrived from angles that had nothing to do with the source. Sloan stood at the edge of the riverbed and turned his head slowly, trying to triangulate, and the sound gave him nothing clean. Just the growing certainty that something with a motor was moving toward them through the dark. Deke was already on the radio. Kestrel, Ironclad. We have possible ground elements, inbound, bearing unknown. Those scout birds overhead are marking us. Request you expedite that extraction package. The response came back measured, unhurried, in the way that command posts are always unhurried when they're not the ones on the ground. Ironclad extraction package is 12 out. Hold position and maintain. 12 out meant 12 minutes ago it had been 12 minutes. Nobody had updated the clock. Sloan had been in enough of these situations to know that 12 minutes from a command post meant somewhere between 10 and 25 on the ground, depending on what the pilots found when they crossed into the corridor. He walked back to the wreck. The team had done what teams do, spread out without being told, found cover behind the collapsed fuselage, the broken rotor assembly, a low shelf of rock on the north bank of the dry riverbed. Adebayo was at the south end with the long gun, scanning. Kowalski and Reyes were running comms on a backup frequency. The man with the hurt leg, Ferris, had wrapped it himself and was sitting with his back against the fuselage and his rifle across his knees, watching the western approach. Nobody was panicking. Sloan had picked these people partly for that reason. He found Rhea at the medical kit. She'd pulled it open and was doing something to her left hand, wrapping it, methodically, not tight enough to cut circulation, but tight enough to hold. He watched her work the tape one-handed against her knee. "Let me," he started. "I have it." He stood there anyway. "How's the head?" She touched the cut above her eye. It had stopped bleeding, mostly, dried to a dark line against her temple. "Fine." "You hit the panel hard." "I know, I was there." She bit the end of the tape and smoothed it down. "What's your ammunition situation?" He blinked. "What?" "Your team. Total rounds, working weapons, any casualties that affect firepower." She looked up at him. "I'm not asking to be polite. I'm asking because I need to know what we have." Sloan ran the numbers in his head. 7 functional shooters. Ferris is mobile but slow. We've got... He did the math. 300 rounds roughly, between the rifles. Adebayo's got the M110 with 2 mags. We burned through a lot in the canyon. She nodded. Not the nod of someone receiving information, the nod of someone adding it to a calculation already in progress. "Those scouts overhead," she said. "How long have they been circling?" 4 minutes. "They're not attacking." "No, that means they're waiting," she said. "Ground element is the main effort. The birds are just fixing our position for the vehicles." She looked west toward the sound. "How many vehicles do you think?" Deke counted headlights before they cut them. 4, maybe 5. 4 or 5 vehicles in this terrain means 20 to 30 personnel, probably more. She pulled her jacket straight. The movement was automatic, habitual. The small reorganization a person does when they're shifting mental modes. 12 minutes is a long time. "I know it's a long time." "Do you have a plan?" Sloan looked at her steadily. He was trying to work out what she was, and he was doing it in real time, in a way he didn't particularly like. That specific discomfort of realizing your original read on a person was not just wrong but embarrassingly wrong. He'd looked at her in that ops tent and seen a problem that didn't fit the file. Now he was on the ground in a hostile riverbed with one dead pilot and a dying extraction window, and she was the one asking whether he had a plan. "We hold the wreck," he said. "Use it for cover. Channel them into the riverbed approach from the west. It narrows there, limits their spread." "And the scouts?" "Can't do much about the scouts. They can direct fire." "I know." She looked at him, not challenging, not second-guessing, just looking. "If they can talk to the ground element in real time, you lose the choke point advantage. They'll route around you before you can adjust." "What's your alternative?" She was quiet for a moment. "There's fuel still in the tanks," she said. "The aircraft's on its side, but the main fuel cell is starboard. It's on top now. The access line is on the underside of the frame." She turned and looked at the wreck. "The riverbed narrows about 200 meters west of us, single vehicle width." Sloan followed her eyes. He started to understand. "You want to use the fuel," he said. "It's either a liability or an asset," she said. "Right now it's just a fire waiting to happen when those scouts direct a rocket at us. If we control when and where it burns, we control the choke point. You control the choke point," she said. "I'm not a soldier." There was something in the way she said it, not modest, not deflecting, just precise, a clear statement of what she was and what she wasn't. Sloan had heard people say, "I'm not a soldier," as an excuse. She was saying it as a category, a factual boundary she had no interest in pretending didn't exist. "Sloan!" Deke's voice came from the north bank, low and direct. "I've got engine noise bearing west-southwest, estimated 3 minutes. 3 minutes. The 12-minute window had just become 3. Sloan made the call. "Rhea, walk me through the fuel access." She talked, and he listened. She explained the access port on the underside of the frame, a valve meant for emergency draining in crash scenarios, designed so ground crews could render an aircraft inert after a hard landing. She'd dealt with it before, she said, without saying where or when. The valve required a quarter turn with a specific hex key that should be in the emergency panel on the port wall. Should be. Sloan sent Kowalski to check. Kowalski came back with the hex key and a flat expression that meant he was updating his opinions about the woman, but wasn't ready to talk about it. "The fuel will run downhill," she said. "The riverbed slopes west. If you open the valve and give it 2 minutes, it'll reach the Narrows. Maybe more, depending on how much is left in the cell. And if we ignite it before they get through the Narrows, you stop the convoy, temporarily." She met his eyes. "It's not permanent. They go around. But around means north or south, which means over the banks, which means single file, which means Adebayo can work." Sloan looked at Adebayo. Adebayo, who was at the far end of the riverbed with the M110 and the practiced stillness of a man who had spent a significant portion of his adult life being patient in dark places. "How long do we have after ignition before the fire reaches the wreck?" Sloan asked. "If the valve drains the way it should?" She thought, 8 minutes. Maybe 10. The cell won't be full. We burned a lot in flight. What's left will drain fast. And if a scout puts a rocket into the wreck before we ignite? Then we have a much shorter window, she said. Sloan didn't smile. But something in his face shifted. The microscopic adjustment of a man who is recalibrating in real time and doesn't love what the new calibration requires him to acknowledge. "Okay," he said. "We do it your way." "It's not my way," she said. "It's the only way. There's a difference." He almost said something to that. He didn't. Kowalski, he said instead. Get under that frame and open the valve. Full drain. Copy. Kowalski looked at Rhea. A fraction of a second, then he moved. The fuel smell hit them 2 minutes later. Sharp, volatile, the chemical edge of kerosene mixing with the dry mineral smell of the riverbed. It ran dark and slow down the gravel incline, barely visible in the NODs, just a sheen moving through the dark. Sloan pulled the team back from the western approach. He redistributed them. 3 on the north bank, 2 on the south, Deke behind the fuselage with the radio, Ferris immobile but accurate at the east end where he could cover the rear. Adebayo stayed where he was. Rhea took a position on the north bank, 3 meters from Sloan, behind a shelf of rock. She had her phone, not a civilian phone, something hardened, encrypted, with a display that meant something when she tilted it. She was watching it. He didn't ask what she was watching. The engine sounds separated. That was the thing about sound in the dark. When it was far enough away, it merged into a single impression. As it got close, it started to differentiate. Sloan could hear now that there were at least 3 distinct engine notes. 2 heavy, trucks probably, and 1 lighter, faster, the whine of something with higher clearance, a technical or a scout vehicle. He keyed the team channel, voice below a whisper. Hold. Wait for my call. Headlights appeared at the western edge of the riverbed. They'd cut them at range, running dark for the approach, but someone had switched them on too early, probably navigating through the bank transition. Sloan saw the silhouette of the lead vehicle nosing over the bank and into the riverbed channel. It stopped. He watched it sit there in the nods. Engine idling, headlights probing the dark ahead. The driver had found the wreck in the lights. They were assessing. Voices. Not English. He caught the cadence of it without catching the words. Then the vehicle started forward again. It entered the narrows. Wait, Sloan breathed. The second vehicle came over the bank. Bigger. A truck. High-sided. It followed the first. Wait. The lighter vehicle appeared. The technical. He could see the silhouette of the weapon mount. Now. Sloan, he said into the channel. Reyes, on the south bank with the flare, caught the single-syllable call sign and understood it for what it was. The flare went into the fuel. The riverbed lit up. Not a Hollywood explosion. Not a fireball that shook the mountains. A spreading wall of orange moving fast along the fuel line, catching in the gravel where the kerosene had pooled in the low places. The lead vehicle hit its brakes. The second vehicle swerved right and caught the bank. The technical tried to reverse and its rear wheels spun in the gravel. The convoy stopped, confused, exposed, temporarily blinded by their own headlights in the sudden orange light. Now, Sloan said, and the team opened up. It wasn't the clean sweep of a rehearsed ambush. It never was. 2 riflemen on the north bank putting rounds through the windscreen of the lead vehicle. Adebayo working the technical from the south, first shot through the engine block, second shot through the weapon mount before the gunner could get oriented. Kowalski and Reyes suppressing the dismounts. And there were dismounts, personnel bailing from the truck and trying to use it as cover, and the truck was broadside to the south bank, which meant they'd chosen wrong. Sloan fired, reacquired, fired again. The lead vehicle's engine died. The truck was going nowhere on the bank. The technical was done, but the fourth vehicle, the one he hadn't fully counted, had gone north before the fire, over the bank at a different angle, and now he could hear it on the high ground to his left, trying to come around. Flanking north, he called. Somebody get... I see it. Rhea's voice. Flat, immediate. He looked over. She was on the phone. She had it angled toward the north bank, and she was... He processed this slowly. She was reading movement. Something on that screen. A feed, an overlay, something he couldn't identify from this angle. Second vehicle in the convoy is hung up on the bank. It's going to try to push through in... She paused. 40 seconds. The flanking vehicle is running parallel, trying to get your east end. Sloan stared at her. How do you... Ferris, she said into the air, like she knew Ferris was on the channel. Vehicle coming from your north, 100 meters. Ferris said nothing. 45 seconds later, a single shot from the east end of the riverbed. The flanking vehicle stopped. Sloan looked at Rhea. She had put the phone down, screen dark, face neutral. What is that? He asked. A phone, she said. Don't. She looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes. Not evasion, calculation. The specific calculation of someone deciding how much a situation required them to give. Contractor tools, she said. I have access to certain assets, overhead. That's not... Commander, Deke's voice cut in from the fuselage. I've got the extraction package on comms. 6 minutes out, 2 birds. 6 minutes. The fire in the riverbed was burning lower. The fuel was going. Beyond it, someone in the surviving vehicles was reorganizing. He could hear it, the shouted commands, the sound of personnel moving laterally. They're going to try the bank again, Rhea said. Both sides. They know we're limited. I know. When they come over the bank, you lose the choke point. They can spread. I know. 6 minutes is a long time. You said that already. It keeps being true, she said. Sloan checked his ammunition. He looked at his team. He looked at the dying fire and the dark beyond it, where something was reorganizing with the specific patience of people who had counted guns and found the numbers in their favor. He looked at Rhea. You said you have overhead assets, he said. I said I have access to certain assets. Can they bowl? No. Immediate. Firm. Not in this time frame, not for this. What I have is eyes, not weapons. Then what do you have that helps us in the next 6 minutes? She was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone who didn't know. The quiet of someone arranging what they knew into an order that made sense to give away. Tell me everything about this riverbed east of our position, she said. Every feature, every piece of terrain. Sloan thought. There's a bend about 400 meters east, then it opens up, wider flat section, then the valley. The valley has high walls. South wall is sheer, north wall has a slope. How steep? 40 degrees, maybe 45. She nodded, looked east, looked at the fire, looked at the convoy reorganizing in the dark. If you move the team east, she said, past the bend, you give up the wreck as cover, but you gain the bend itself as a choke point, and the valley beyond it gives the extraction birds a landing zone without them having to hover over a firefight. She paused. The convoy follows you east, they're channeled. Adebayo works the channel from the slope. That puts us in the open between here and the bend. Yes. We'd be moving under fire, so... Probably. He stared at the eastern dark. 400 meters of open riverbed in the dark, with a fire behind them and a reorganizing convoy ahead, with Ferris on a bad leg and Torres with a broken arm being half carried by whoever was next to him. The things you did when all the options were bad. Anyone who can carry a rifle and move, he said into the channel. We're going east. Ferris, Torres, Kowalski, and Reyes, you've got them. Deke, stay on comms. Don't lose that extraction channel. Adebayo. I heard, Adebayo said from the dark where he'd been listening to all of it. You're last out. North slope when we clear the bend. Copy. Sloan looked at Rhea. She was already on her feet. Stay with me, he said. I'm not cargo, she said. He almost said something to that too. He didn't. The team moved east into the dark, and behind them the fire in the riverbed burned down to its last fuel, and in the orange light of its dying the convoy found the far bank and started to come over it, and the night was still and cold and full of the sound of engines moving toward them, with something decided about it, something committed, the sound of people who had counted the numbers and liked what they found. Ahead, the bend in the riverbed was a black curve in the dark. 400 meters. Ferris was already limping hard. Torres was half leaning on Kowalski and keeping pace because he was that kind of person, or because adrenaline was that kind of chemical. Rhea ran alongside Sloan and didn't ask for anything and didn't slow down. Her phone was in her jacket pocket, screen dark. He wanted to ask about it again. He didn't have the breath. 300 meters to the bend. The first shot from the convoy went wide and high. They were still adjusting, still ranging, but they had found the direction. 200 meters. The second shot was closer. Someone on the team said something that Sloan didn't register consciously, but his body registered. A tightening, a forward lean, the animal response to proximity. 100 meters. Don't bunch up, he shouted. Spread and move. The team spread. The riverbed gravel was loud under boots. Rhea was slightly ahead of him now, running with the compact economy of someone who had done this before, who had run in the dark before over terrain that wanted to turn her ankles, who had been this afraid before and learned that afraid was just a word for a body doing what it was supposed to do. The bend came up. They came around it. The wider valley opened ahead, and in the sky to the south, distant, growing, unmistakable, the thudding approach of two sets of rotor blades cutting the air. The extraction package. Not 6 minutes. 4. They'd pushed it. Deke was already talking to them, giving the grid, calling out the LZ, his voice cutting through the running and the gunfire from behind them like a cable pulled taut across everything else. Adebayo went up the north slope. Sloan heard him settle in without looking. He didn't need to look. He knew what Adebayo was going to do, and he knew Adebayo was going to do it correctly. He turned back to the bend. The lead vehicle of the convoy came around it at 30 miles an hour with its headlights cutting the dark. Adebayo shot the engine block on the first round. The vehicle skidded to a stop at the entrance of the valley, broadside, blocking the bend for whatever came behind it. The extraction birds were over them now. Two shapes in the dark, noses pitched forward, coming in fast and low. The crew chiefs were already on the guns, already working, already talking to Deke about the threat picture. LZ is clear south, Deke called. Get on! Get on! They got on. Kowalski first with Torres, dragging him through the door and into the aircraft. Reyes with Ferris. The rest of the team flowing into the helicopters with the practiced urgency of people who knew exactly how long doors stayed open. Sloan was last. He stood at the edge of the LZ and looked back at the bend where the dead vehicle was buying them their margin, and he counted his people, and he got 8, and then he looked for 9. Rhea was 10 feet behind him, standing in the rotor wash with her hair across her face and her jacket open and both hands at her sides. Move, he said. She moved. They loaded together, and the doors closed, and the helicopters pulled up and banked hard south, and below them the riverbed shrank to a line and the fire was just an orange smear and the vehicles were just headlights in the dark, small and directionless and falling behind. Sloan sat in the cargo section and looked at the roof and breathed. Across from him, Rhea sat with her back against the wall and her wrapped hands in her lap and her eyes closed. Not sleeping. Something else. The particular stillness of a person accounting for something. Nobody spoke. The helicopters ran south through the dark corridor, and somewhere below them, the mountains of Ashkar province passed, and the airspace changed, and the threat level dropped in the incremental way it always dropped. Not gone, not safe, just less and less immediate, until the body started to believe it might actually have gotten through this. Torres, next to Kowalski, looked across the cabin at Rhea. She didn't open her eyes. He looked at Sloan. Sloan looked at the roof. Outside, the stars were very clear. The kind of clear you only got at altitude, above the dust, above the light. The kind of clear that didn't care what had happened in the dark below it. The helicopter flew on. Falcon Reach outpost came up out of the desert like something that had been hammered into the ground rather than built. Low concrete walls, antenna clusters, the flat utilitarian geometry of a place designed for function and nothing else. The helicopter set down on the pad at 0134 local, and the rotors were still spinning when the medical team came out. They took Torres first. His arm had been stabilized in the aircraft, but the break was bad. Compound, the bone visible when Kowalski had cut the sleeve. And Torres had spent the last 40 minutes of the flight with his eyes closed and his jaw set in the particular way that meant he was managing pain by not acknowledging it existed. Ferris went next, limping with his hand on the medic's shoulder. Deke's hand had been wrapped in the field, but the shrapnel was still in there, somewhere deep in the meat below the knuckle, and he'd been flexing it experimentally the whole flight south with the expression of a man taking inventory. The rest of the team walked off the pad under their own power. Rhea walked off last. Nobody offered her a hand, not rudely, just the automatic oversight of people who had spent the last 2 hours categorizing her as the package. And packages didn't need hands, they needed handlers, and the handlers had moved on to the next thing. She stepped off the pad and onto the concrete apron and stood there for a moment in the rotor wash while the medical team moved around her and nobody made eye contact. She was used to that. She picked up her bag. Someone had pulled it from the wreck, she didn't know who, and walked toward the lit entrance of the main building. A man in a clean uniform intercepted her before she got there. He was tall, 40-something, with the composed authority of someone whose job it was to compose himself in front of people who'd just come in from things. His name tape said Carver. He had a tablet, and he was looking at it the way people look at things when they want you to know they've read everything about you. "Ms. Dalton," he said, "I'm going to need you to come with me." "I need to wash my hands," she said. "That can wait." She looked at him. Her hands were wrapped and blood-dried, and there was riverbed grit under every fingernail, and the cut on her head had dried to something she could feel when she moved her eyebrow. She looked at him the way a person looks at a statement that doesn't deserve argument because arguing would imply it merited engagement. "It can wait," she said, and she went with him. The room they put her in was not an interrogation room in the formal sense. It had a table and chairs and a whiteboard and a coffee maker that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the outpost was established. It was, she understood, the kind of room where things got decided about people, and the people being decided about were not typically in the room when it happened. She was in the room. That was new. Carver sat across from her with his tablet and his composed face, and a second man she hadn't been introduced to. Younger, serious, the specific seriousness of someone performing seriousness rather than feeling it. He had a recorder on the table between them, a small one, the kind that made a point of being visible. "Walk me through the events of tonight," Carver said. She walked him through it. Flat, sequential, no editorializing. She described the hydraulic failure, the approach to the cockpit, the canyon routing, the auto-rotation, the landing. She described the fuel drain and the fire and the eastern movement to the extraction LZ. She answered questions when he asked them and stopped when she'd answered. When she finished, Carver looked at his tablet for a moment. "You identified the hydraulic failure before the co-pilot did," he said. "Yes." "How?" "Sound and vibration pattern. The M model has a specific resonance change when the secondary hydraulic path takes primary load. I've heard it before." "Where?" She looked at him. "That's in a different file, Mr. Carver." "Humor me." "I'd rather not." The young, serious man shifted in his chair. Carver put his tablet down flat on the table. A deliberate gesture, she noted. The gesture of someone setting aside their prepared material to have a real conversation. She'd seen it before. It meant the real questions were coming. "You are listed on the mission manifest as a civilian intelligence contractor," Carver said. "Non-combatant, no tactical role, asset transport only. Tonight you flew a crippled military helicopter through hostile terrain, conducted what amounts to a tactical fuel denial operation, and used what appear to be unauthorized overhead surveillance assets to provide real-time threat data to an active military unit." He paused. "Help me understand what I'm looking at." "You're looking at everyone who was on that helicopter being alive," she said. "That's not an answer. It's the most relevant one." The young, serious man opened his mouth. She looked at him. He closed it. Carver leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Dalton, I'm going to be direct. There are people in this building right now who are very interested in the surveillance asset you used tonight. The access level required for that kind of real-time overhead feed in Ashkar province. That's not contractor clearance. That's not even standard military clearance. That's something else entirely." "Then you know who to call," she said. "I'm calling you." "I'm not authorized to discuss the asset. You used it in the field tonight. In an emergency, yes. To support a classified military operation. To help a group of people not die in a riverbed," she said. Her voice didn't change. "You can frame it however you need to." Carver sat back. He looked at her for a long time. Not trying to intimidate, she thought, genuinely trying to read something. "Who are you?" he said. "Not the file version, the real version." She looked at the whiteboard. Someone had left a tactical map sketch on it from what looked like a previous briefing. Sector lines, grid references, a rough sketch of terrain she didn't recognize. She studied it for a moment the way she always studied maps, involuntarily, her eyes running the topography before she'd decided to look. "I'm the person you need to let go," she said, "so I can clean up the situation my network flagged before this insertion went sideways in the first place." Carver picked up his tablet again. "Your network flagged a situation." "Yes." "And you were being transported to—" "I can't discuss the details of the operation in this setting." She met his eyes. "Which you know." He knew, she could see it. He was running a process that had been handed to him by people above him, and the process required him to sit in this room and ask these questions, And somewhere in the chain of authority, the answers would connect to something he didn't have full visibility on. And that was the nature of the work she'd been doing for the last 6 years. The specific invisibility of it. The way it required the people adjacent to it to ask questions they'd never fully get answered. She'd chosen that. She'd chosen it deliberately. There were mornings she hated herself for it. "I need to make a call," she said. Carver considered this. To whom? She gave him a name. Not a person's name. A department designation. A string of letters and numbers that meant something specific to someone who knew where to look. She watched Carver's face when she said it and saw the microsecond of recalibration. The slight adjustment that happened when a person realized the thing they were looking at was connected to something larger and differently weighted than they'd assumed. He put the tablet down again. He stood up. "1 minute," he said. He and the young, serious man went out. She sat alone in the room with the coffee maker and the tactical map on the whiteboard and let herself breathe for the first time since the helicopter had started dying. Her hands hurt. She hadn't let herself notice until now. The right one. The one that had been pulling collective and fighting cyclic for 40 minutes in a machine that didn't want to cooperate, had a deep ache in it that went all the way up to the elbow. She flexed it carefully under the table. The wrapping helped. Not enough. She looked at the ceiling. Somewhere in this building, Torres was getting his arm set. Ferris was getting imaging on his leg. Deke was getting the shrapnel out of his hand, probably complaining about it with the specific dark humor of someone who needed to perform being fine because not performing it was worse. All of them alive. She closed her eyes. Sloan found her 15 minutes later. He didn't knock. The door was open, and he stood in it for a moment without her acknowledging him, because she'd heard him coming and was deciding whether she wanted to handle this now or later. She decided now. She opened her eyes. He looked worse in the outpost light than he had in the dark. The dirt was more visible. The fatigue was more visible. He had blood on his collar that wasn't his, Torres probably, or Deke, and he'd lost the tactical vest somewhere between the pad and here, just the base layer now, and he looked like a man who had used everything he had and was still standing on the far side of it, not entirely sure how. He came into the room and sat down across from her. He didn't sit the way Carver had sat. Across the table, formal, positioned. He sat the way tired people sit, like the chair was the first horizontal surface he'd trusted in hours. He looked at her hands. She let him look. "Torres is going to need surgery," he said. "The break's bad." "I know. He'll be okay." "I know that too." Sloan put his forearms on the table. He had a habit, she'd noticed, of occupying his hands when he didn't know what to do with them, gripping things, running his thumb along things. Right now he had nothing to grip, and his hands were just on the table, and it made him look briefly uncertain in a way that was probably unfamiliar to him. "I owe you an apology," he said. She looked at him. She hadn't expected that, not this fast. "I judged you by what I was told you were," he said. "That was wrong. I treated you like a problem I was transporting instead of a person on my team, and that—" He stopped, reorganized. "I almost didn't let you into the cockpit. That could have killed everyone on the aircraft. That's on me." She was quiet for a moment. "It could have," she said. "But you moved. 2 seconds before it mattered." "You moved," she said again. He looked at her. "That's not absolution." "I'm not offering absolution," she said. "I'm just being accurate." She paused. "You made a bad call and then you corrected it. Most people don't correct it." Something in his face shifted. Not relief exactly. Something more complicated. The specific look of a person being let off a hook they felt they deserved to stay on, trying to decide if accepting the release was honest. "Who are you?" he said. Not the way Carver had said it. Not a process question, not an authority question. A real one. She thought about how to answer that. She thought about the 6 years of not answering it, the specific discipline of it, the way she'd learned to let questions like that pass through her without catching. "Someone who used to fly," she said. "Military?" "I'm not asking for a file," he said. "I'm asking you." She looked at him for a long time. He held it, didn't look away, didn't fill the silence with something easier. He just waited. "Special Operations Aviation," she said. "Rotary, Ashkar Province, and adjacent areas." She paused. "A long time ago." "How long?" 6 years. He did the math. She watched him do it, watched him arrive at the window of time and start to think about what had been happening in Ashkar province 6 years ago, and what an elite rotary pilot's career looked like on the far side of that. "What happened?" he asked. She picked up the styrofoam cup that Carver's assistant had brought in earlier and looked into it. Cold coffee. She set it down. "I made a decision that saved 12 people," she said. "And after it, I wasn't capable of making that kind of decision again. For a while." She looked at the whiteboard. "So I found work that didn't require me to hold lives in my hands directly." "Intelligence, yes. But you still know how to fly." "You don't forget," she said. "I used to wish you did." He was quiet with that for a moment. Outside through the wall, she could hear the outpost. The low hum of generators, a radio somewhere, a door. The ordinary machinery of a place that stayed awake because it had to. "The overhead asset," Sloan said. "Carver's losing his mind about it." "I know." "Are you going to explain it?" "Not to Carver." "To me?" She looked at him. "There are people in Ashkar province who work for me," she said carefully. "Not soldiers, not contractors. People who live there and have access to things that can't be accessed any other way. One of them has a relationship with a system that provides overhead coverage to a very small number of people with very specific clearance." "You're talking about a human intelligence network." "I'm talking about relationships," she said, "which is different." "Different how?" "A network is a structure. A structure can be mapped, compromised, rolled up." She set down the cup. "Relationships are harder to map." He thought about that. "That's what you were transporting, not yourself. Information about that network." "I was transporting myself," she said. "The network goes where I go." Sloan was quiet. "Carver's going to pull your clearance," he said. "Carver doesn't have the authority to pull my clearance." "He's going to try." "He can try," she said. "Someone will call him before morning and explain the situation, and by noon tomorrow my clearance will be reviewed upward, not downward." She said it without satisfaction, just factually. "That's how this works." He looked at her. "You've been through this before." "Versions of it. And it doesn't—" He stopped. "What?" "Bother you," he said. "The way people treat you, the way I treated you, like you're—" "Cargo?" she said. He didn't flinch from it. "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. The honest answer was that it had bothered her for years, that she'd spent the first 2 years in intelligence work in a specific kind of rage about it, the kind that burned clean and hot and had nowhere to go because she'd chosen invisibility, and invisibility meant accepting what invisibility cost. The honest answer was that she'd gotten past rage into something else, something more functional, a kind of deliberate detachment that she'd mistaken for peace for a while before she understood it wasn't. "It bothers me," she said. "I've gotten good at not showing it." He nodded slowly. "I made myself invisible on purpose," she said, 6 years ago. Because the alternative was, being visible meant having a record, having a command structure, having people above me who could put me in a cockpit again. She paused. "And I wasn't ready for that. And now?" She looked at him. "Tonight happened," she said. Carver came back 40 minutes later with a different energy. She noticed it immediately. The composed face was the same, but the quality behind it had changed. He'd made a call, or received one, and whatever had passed between him and whoever was on the other end of it had rearranged his understanding of the room. He sat down. The young, serious man didn't come back in. "I've been asked to extend every professional courtesy," Carver said. "That's generous," she said. "It's not my generosity. I want to be clear about that." "Noted." He looked at the tablet for a moment, put it face down. "I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to ask you to write a full incident report for my files, and then you can go wherever you need to go." "Ask," she said. "The network asset you used tonight for overhead coverage," he said carefully. "Is it intact?" She understood why he was asking. If the asset had been visible enough, if the surveillance feed had been detectable, if its use in a combat zone had created a signal that someone on the other side could trace, then the network had a new exposure point. And an exposed network was a compromised network, and a compromised network was a dead one. And the people in it weren't assets anymore. They were liabilities. "It's intact," she said. "The feed was passive, no active emission, Nobody who was looking for it would have known it was there. You're certain? I'm never certain, she said, but I'm as certain as the situation allows. He nodded. Something in him visibly settled. Not fully, but partially. The incident report, he said. Standard form, your account, as complete as you can make it within your operational constraints. Leave the asset details in a separate classified annex and mark it for the appropriate review level. I know the process, she said. I know you do. He stood. Ms. Dalton, he paused at the door, for what it's worth, I've read a version of your file, the parts I'm cleared for. Another pause. I'm sorry about how you came in tonight. She looked at the door after he left. Worth something, she thought. Not much, but something. The incident report took 2 hours. She wrote it in a small office off the main corridor that somebody had cleared for her. A desk, a secured terminal, a window that looked out onto the concrete apron where the helicopters sat in the dark. She wrote the full sequence, the asset identification at FOB Anvil, the manifest listing, the insertion timeline, the failure sequence, the cockpit decision. She wrote it in the specific language of someone who had written a great many incident reports and knew exactly how much precision was necessary and where precision became liability. She wrote Torres's arm into the medical section. She wrote Finch's death into the KIA section. She wrote the coordinates of the wreck. When she got to the section for her own actions, she wrote it flat and sequential, and without the texture of what it had actually been. The specific quality of those 6 minutes in the cockpit where her hands had been fighting a machine that had given up. And some part of her had not given up back. Some part of her had stayed with the machine and kept talking to it the way you talk to something that needs convincing rather than commanding. She didn't write that. You couldn't write that. It didn't fit the form. She submitted it at 0347. She sat in the chair for a while after. Outside, the concrete apron was lit by the orange-white floods that Outpost kept burning all night. And in that light, the helicopters that had brought them in from the riverbed sat still on the pad, and she could see the crew chiefs moving around them with flashlights, doing their post-flight checks, going through the sequences, the ordinary maintenance of machinery after it had been used. She watched them work. She was still watching when Sloan appeared in the doorway. You should sleep, he said. Probably. He came in and stood at the window beside her, looking at the pad. Torres is out of surgery. They set the arm. He's going to be down for 3 months. He'll recover. Yeah. He looked at the helicopters. They pulled the flight recorder from the wreck. The guys in the maintenance section are arguing about whether what you did in the auto-rotation was technically possible. It was possible, she said. I did it. That's what I told them. She looked at him sideways. He was still looking at the pad, and in the outpost light he looked less ragged than he had in the room with Carver. Cleaner, slightly. Someone had given him a chance to wash his face. But the fatigue was still there in the set of his shoulders, the weight a person carries after the body has burned through everything it had and hasn't yet found its way back to normal. What happens to you now? She asked. Debrief in the morning. Mission review. After action. He shrugged. Standard process. The report you submit, she said. What does it say? He was quiet for a moment. It says what happened. All of it? All of it I know. He turned slightly to look at her, including the part where I almost left you in the cargo section to watch us die. She looked back at the window. You don't have to yet. I already wrote it, he said. Submitted it an hour ago. A pause. I'm not the kind of person who leaves that out. She believed him. She'd believed him since the moment he stepped aside from the cockpit door. Not gracefully, not willingly, but he'd stepped aside. She'd been in enough situations with enough people to know that the ones who could correct themselves in the middle of a decision under pressure were rarer than the ones who couldn't. There's going to be a review, he said, of tonight, your role in it, the asset, all of it. He paused. People are going to want to know things. I know. And some of those people are going to push on the question of why a civilian intelligence contractor had the access level and the capability that you had. He looked at her. And the story that comes out is going to be about you, whether you want it to or not. She understood what he was telling her, that the 6 years of invisible work were over, not because she'd failed at them, but because she'd been too visible in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time, And now the shape of her was in too many after-action reports and incident files and medical records for it to stay contained. "I know," she said again, quieter. "Is that—" He stopped, started again. "How do you feel about that?" She thought about it. The honest answer was complicated. The honest answer had layers in it. The part of her that had been afraid of being visible, because visible meant accountable, and accountable meant the kind of scrutiny she hadn't survived intact the last time. The part of her that had sat in that cockpit tonight, with her hands on the controls of a dying aircraft, and felt something come back to life in her that she'd spent 6 years pretending was properly dead. "I don't know yet," she said. He nodded. Like that was the right answer. Like he'd expected something hedged and gotten something honest instead and appreciated the difference. They stood at the window for a while without talking. The crew chiefs finished their post-flight checks and shut off their flashlights and went inside. And the concrete apron went back to just the orange-white floods, and the shapes of the helicopters, and the dark beyond the walls, the desert beyond the wire, the mountains somewhere beyond the desert. "One more thing," he said. She waited. "I talked to the wing commander before the debrief tomorrow," he said. "He wants to know if you'd be willing to go through the formal review voluntarily. Your background, your qualifications, the full picture." He paused. "Not as a process requirement. He's asking." She turned to look at him fully. "Why?" "Because the way he sees it," Sloan said, "someone with your combination of skills and access and field judgment is—" He used the word underutilized. A pause. "That's a significant understatement, in my opinion." She was quiet. "You don't have to," he said. "You can go back to whatever you were going to Kestrel to do. That's your choice, and nobody's taking it." She looked at her hands, the wrapped ones, the ones that still ached from gripping a cyclic for 40 minutes in the dark. She thought about the 6 years of distance she'd put between herself and exactly this kind of visibility, this kind of consequence, the specific weight of other people's lives in her grip. She thought about what it had felt like when the helicopter steadied. Not relief, not competence. Something older than both of those things. Something she'd been trying to put down for 6 years and hadn't quite managed. "Tell him I'll be at the debrief," she said. Sloan nodded once. He pushed off from the window, moved toward the door. "Sloan," she said. He stopped. "The thing you said, about not being the kind of person who leaves things out of a report." She paused. "I believe you." He looked at her for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I know." He left. She stayed at the window for a long time after, watching the helicopters sit still on the concrete in the outpost light, watching the dark beyond the walls, watching the pale line of the horizon where the desert met whatever came next. Her hands were still. She let them be still. The wing commander's name was Dressel, and he'd been running aviation operations out of Falcon Reach for 2 years, and he had the particular patience of someone who'd learned that the most important information always came sideways. Never from the official version, always from the shape of what the official version left out. He'd read the incident report. Both incident reports, Sloan's and hers. He'd read them in sequence and then read them again, and then he'd sat in his office for 20 minutes looking at his wall before he'd called Sloan. The briefing was set for 0900. Rhea arrived at 0855 and sat in the second row. Not the first, not hiding, just not performing. She had her hands on the table in front of her, and the cut on her head had been properly closed with 2 strips of surgical tape, and she had found clean clothes somewhere, contractor khaki again, nondescript, nothing tactical. The room filled around her. She recognized some of them. Carver in the corner, still composed, still watching. Deke, hand properly bandaged, standing against the wall with his arms crossed. Kowalski and Reyes in the back row. Adebayo. Quiet, still, the same stillness he'd had in the dark with the M110. He caught her eye when he sat down. He didn't nod. He just held the look for a moment, which meant something from him that she understood wasn't easy. Sloan came in last. He sat in the first row. He didn't look back at her. Dressel stood at the front and didn't waste time. "We're here to conduct after-action review on the ironclad insertion, exfil compromise, and subsequent ground engagement at grid reference." He read it. "In Sector 7 of Ashkar Province, we had 1 KIA, 2 personnel requiring medical intervention, total loss of the primary aircraft." He paused. "We also had everyone come home. which is not a thing I'm going to let pass without acknowledgement. He looked around the room. His eyes rested on Rhea for a moment, then moved on. We're going to go through this in sequence, he said. I want timeline, decisions, outcomes. I want the honest version, not the version that protects anyone's position. If you made a call that was wrong, say so and say why. If someone else made a call that was right when it shouldn't have been possible to make it, say that too. He set his papers down. Sloan stood. He spoke for 20 minutes. He did not leave anything out. Rhea listened to him describe the moment at the cockpit door, not softened, not reframed, exactly as it had been. And she watched the room listen to it and felt the specific quality of the attention that moved through it. The recalibration. Trained people reassessing a sequence they'd been told was one thing and finding it was something else. When Sloan got to the cockpit, he said, I turned it over to Ms. Dalton, who had identified the failure mode with greater precision than our co-pilot had at that point, and whose subsequent decisions over the next 40-plus minutes are the primary reason this mission has living participants. He sat down. Dressel looked at Rhea. Ms. Dalton, he said, walk us through your assessment from the point you identified the hydraulic failure. She stood up. She walked them through it. Not the same way she'd walked Carver through it. Flatter, more defensive. She walked them through it the way she'd walk a class of aviation students through it, if she'd ever done that. Which she hadn't. But the instinct was there. The instinct to explain the reasoning, not just the outcome. To show the decision tree, not just the decision. She talked for 30 minutes. When she got to the auto-rotation, the room was very quiet. She described the RPM math, the collective timing, the specific window at 20 feet where the choice had to be made and couldn't be undone once it was. She described it factually. She didn't describe the way her hands had felt when she pulled, the full-body commitment of it, the way it required all of her simultaneously in a way that she'd thought was behind her. When she finished, nobody spoke for a moment. Then Deke said, from the wall, what was the aircraft's sink rate when you pulled? She calculated. Approximately 1,700 feet per minute. And you survived that. We all survived it, she said. That was the point. Deke looked at his bandaged hand. He looked at her. He nodded once, the same quality of nod as Adebayo's look, something given that wasn't easy to give. Dressel let the moment exist. Then, the fuel operation. Walk me through the rationale. She did. She talked through the riverbed geometry, the choke point value, the extraction window, the calculation of risk. She talked through the decision to move east after the fire, the valley approach, the extraction LZ assessment. When she finished, Carver said, the overhead asset. She looked at him. That's in the classified annex. This room is cleared. She looked at Dressel. He looked back at her. Steady, patient, the particular patience she'd assessed in him from across the room. Waiting. I have a relationship with a network asset that provides passive overhead surveillance in certain regions of Ashkar province, she said. The asset was accessed during the ground phase of the operation to provide real-time vehicle tracking. The access was within my operational authority. The asset's integrity was not compromised. What kind of asset? Carver said. That detail is above the classification level of this room, she said. It's in the annex. The appropriate review process will handle it. Carver looked like he wanted to push. He looked at Dressel. Dressel gave him a slight, precise shake of the head. Carver sat back. Dressel looked at his papers. Last question, he said, and it's not a procedural one. He looked up at Rhea. Why intelligence? 6 years of intelligence work with your background. The room got that quality again. The specific attention that comes when a question has weight and everyone in the room knows it. She stood at the front of the room and considered the question. She thought about what she'd told Sloan in the office last night, and she thought about what she hadn't told him, the specific night 6 years ago, the specific decision, the specific silence afterward that had stretched into weeks, and then months, and then a different life. I needed distance from direct consequence, she said. I thought intelligence work would give me that. Did it? She looked at her hands. Not entirely, she said. Dressel nodded. He gathered his papers. Thank you, Ms. Dalton. He looked at the room. This after action is closed. Medical updates on Torres and Ferris by end of day. Sloan, I need the formal mission review on my desk by 1700. People stood. The room started to move. Ms. Dalton, Dressel said. She turned. Stay a moment. The room filed out. Sloane went last, and at the door he glanced back at her, brief, unreadable, but present, like a man making sure a door was open before he walked through his own. Dressel waited until the room was empty. Then he set his papers down and looked at her the way people look when they've stopped performing their role and decided to just be in the room. I looked at your full file this morning, he said. The parts I could access. There are sections I couldn't. I know. The rescue operation in Ashkar Province, 6 years ago. She was very still. I read the official account, he said. 12 personnel extracted under active fire, night conditions, compromised LZ, aircraft damaged on insertion. He paused. And I read the follow-up, why you left aviation. Then you know, she said. I know what the file says. He looked at her. I don't know what it was like. She looked at the table where her name card was still sitting, the small rectangle of cardstock that said Dalton, R. Contractor, in precise block letters. A category. A label. The thing they'd needed her to be for this meeting so they could put her somewhere on the organizational chart. It was like tonight, she said, except I didn't have 6 years of recovery on the far side of it to tell me it was survivable. She paused. I didn't know after. That kind of not knowing is difficult to function inside. He nodded. Not sympathetically. She didn't need sympathy from him. Just acknowledgement that the thing was real and he'd heard her say it was real. You functioned tonight, he said. Yes. Extremely well by any objective measure. The bar was everyone living, she said. I cleared the bar. You cleared considerably more than the bar. He picked up a pen. Set it down. What I'm about to tell you is informal, off the record of this meeting, not binding, not a proposal in any official sense. She waited. There is a role, he said, that doesn't exist yet. A joint aviation intelligence operations position that would require someone with precisely the combination of qualifications and access that you appear to have. Someone who can go places intelligence assets can't go without a cover and do things aviation assets can't do without context. He paused. Someone who understands both sides of what happens when those two things fail to talk to each other. She looked at him. Like tonight, she said. Like tonight, he agreed, but with the right structure around it, the right support, the right authority, so the next time you need to access an overhead asset in an emergency, you don't have to use personal relationships and hope nobody finds the annex. She was quiet for a long moment. What would it require? She asked. A formal review of your background and qualifications, he said. A medical evaluation, standard for any aviation role. A security review of the network you've been running. He paused. And a willingness to be visible, on paper and in the field, both at once. She looked at the room that was empty now except for the two of them. She looked at the door that Sloane had gone through. She looked at her wrapped hands on the edge of the table. I'll think about it, she said. He nodded. That's all I'm asking. She walked out into the corridor. The outpost was awake around her. The generators, the radio traffic, the particular low-frequency hum of a place that didn't stop. She walked through it and out onto the concrete apron, into the early morning where the desert was just beginning to take color, the flatness of it, the way light came into a place like this slowly from the east and changed everything incrementally, not all at once. She stood in it. Her hands were in her pockets. The right one still ached. The left one was tighter from the wrap. She stood with the light coming in and the helicopters behind her and the desert ahead, and somewhere to the north, past the mountains, the province where her network was intact and her operation was still running and the work she'd been doing for 6 years was still there, still waiting. She stood in it for a long time. Then she went inside to find the communications room. She had calls to make. The communications room at Falcon Reach was a narrow slot of a space that smelled like ozone and old coffee. 3 terminals along one wall and a rack of encrypted radio equipment along the other. The duty operator, a young specialist who looked like he'd been awake since the previous calendar day, stood when she came in, then sat back down when she showed him the access credential on her hardened phone. He moved to the far terminal and put his headphones on and studied the wall with the focused intentionality of someone who had learned that privacy was something you manufactured in small rooms. She sat at the middle terminal and logged in. The first call was to a relay number that didn't appear on any public registry. It rang twice and connected to silence. Not dead silence, live silence. The kind with ambient background. She gave a code phrase. The silence resolved into a voice she recognized. "You're alive," the voice said. "I'm at Falcon Reach," she said. "The insertion compromised. Network is intact." "We know. We've been watching the traffic." A pause. "The asset performed?" "Cleanly. No exposure I can identify." "Good." Another pause. "There's going to be a review." "There's already a review," she said. "I've completed the incident report. The classified annex is filed." The annex is going to generate questions from people who don't have context. "I'm aware. I've told them to route it appropriately." "Ria." The voice shifted. Still professional, but with something underneath it. "How bad was it out there?" She looked at the terminal. "We lost Finch. Everyone else came home." "And you flew them out?" "Yes." A long pause. "That's the first time in—" "I know how long it's been," she said. I'm not cataloging it, I'm just—" The voice stopped. Reorganized. "Are you okay?" She thought about how to answer that. She thought about standing on the concrete apron in the early light and feeling the weight of a decision she hadn't made yet. "I'm functional," she said. "That's enough for right now." "Okay." The voice accepted this. "The Kestrel operation. It's been pushed back 72 hours while the security review runs. You don't have to be on it if you—" "I'll be on it," she said. She logged off. She made 2 more calls, shorter, more technical, network maintenance, the specific work of keeping relationships intact across distance and silence. When she was done, she sat at the terminal for a moment and didn't do anything. The duty operator was still staring at the wall with his headphones on. She logged out and left. The person waiting for her in the corridor was not someone she'd expected. He was 60, maybe older, with the weathered compactness of a man who had spent significant portions of his life in environments that didn't encourage excess. Silver hair, close cut. Civilian clothes. Good ones. Not the pretending to be casual kind, just actual civilian clothes on a person who wore them naturally. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and a paper cup of coffee in one hand, and he looked at her when she came out of the communications room with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite its absence. His name was Harlan Voss. She stopped. "Harlan," she said. "You look terrible," he said. "I've had a complicated night." "I heard." He pushed off the wall. "Walk with me." She walked with him. They went down the main corridor and out through a side door into an exterior passage between 2 prefab buildings where the morning light was coming in sideways and the wind moved through with a thin mineral edge. He sipped his coffee and didn't look at her, which was the way Harlan had always conducted the conversations that mattered. "How long have you been here?" she asked. 2 hours. I was on the early transport." He paused. "I came when I heard the insertion compromised." "You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to." He said it mildly. "I wanted to." She understood what that meant from him. Harlan Voss did not, as a rule, physically relocate himself for reasons that were not operationally essential. She had worked for him for 4 years before she understood the full scope of what he ran. She had worked for him for 6 before she felt something that might be called trust. "The review," she said. "How serious?" "Serious." He sipped the coffee. "There are 3 separate agency equities with questions about the asset access. The military side wants clarity on your role and authority, and there's a 4th party." He paused. "Which 4th party?" He looked at her sideways. "Internal." She stopped walking. He stopped too, half a step ahead of her, and turned. "Internal review," she said. "On what grounds?" "Asset exposure during a non-sanctioned operation. You weren't supposed to be in Ashkar province in that capacity. You were in transit." The helicopter was going down. "I know that. Everyone in the review knows that. That's not the issue." He looked at her steadily. "The issue is that you used a deep cover network asset in a context that put it in proximity to a military operation, and there are people whose job it is to worry about that kind of exposure, regardless of the outcome. The asset is intact. I believe you. They want the review anyway. He paused. It's Fen. She was quiet. Fen was not someone she would have chosen as the name in that sentence. Marcus Fen had been running internal compliance for the organization for 3 years, and he'd been trying to get traction on her operational methods for most of that time. Not because she was wrong, she thought, but because she was outside the frameworks he understood and outside the frameworks he could control. And Fen was the kind of person for whom those two things were the same. When? She said. This afternoon, 1400. He looked at his cup. He flew in on the same transport I did. Of course he did. Ria. He said her name with the specific weight of someone who'd been saving a sentence. There's something you need to know before you go into that room. She waited. Fen has the full file, Harlan said. The original file. Not the contractor version, not the sanitized version. The full record from your military service, including the incident 6 years ago and the subsequent evaluation. He looked at her. Someone pulled it in the last 12 hours. I don't know who authorized the pull. She stood in the passage between the two prefab buildings and felt the specific cold that wasn't the morning air. He's going to use it, she said. I don't know that. Yes, you do. Harlan was quiet. He's going to argue that the incident 6 years ago demonstrated a pattern of unauthorized escalation under pressure, she said, and tonight is the second data point. That's one way to read it. It's the way he'll read it. She looked at the far end of the passage where it opened back onto the main apron. What's he actually after? The network, Harlan said simply. He wants it restructured under a compliance framework he controls, which means moving your assets into a different reporting chain, which means they stop being assets, she said, because the framework he controls has a 30-day review cycle and a 5-layer authorization requirement, and the people in my network operate on a trust basis that requires me specifically, not a committee. Me. Yes, Harlan said. She breathed. Okay, she said. Okay as in I understand the situation. She started walking again. I need an hour. You have until 1400. That's 4 hours. I need one. He fell into step beside her. What do you need the hour for? I need to talk to Torres. Harlan looked at her. The co-pilot. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Why? Because he was in the cockpit, she said, and because Fen is going to characterize what happened in that cockpit as a civilian asset seizing control of a military aircraft without authorization, and because the only person besides me who can speak to what actually happened in those 40 minutes is Torres. She paused. And because I should have gone to see him last night and I didn't. Harlan studied the side of her face. That last part, he said, is that strategic or personal? Both, she said. I'm allowed both. Torres was in the medical bay in a bed by the window, arm in a surgical cast from wrist to elbow, the kind of pail that comes from anesthesia still working its way out. He was awake. He was watching the ceiling with the expression of a man who had run out of things to do and was not entirely at peace with that. He heard her come in and turned his head. Something crossed his face. Recognition, surprise, something else that took her a moment to identify. Relief, she thought. Not dramatic, just the quiet version. Hey, he said. Hey. She pulled a chair, sat close enough that he didn't have to project. How's the arm? They tell me it's fine. It doesn't feel fine. He shifted. The pins go in next week, apparently. Then I'm grounded for 3 months. At least 3 months, she said. Don't let them rush the rehab. He looked at her. You've broken something before. A few things. She paused. You did well last night, holding the aircraft as long as you did with that hydraulic pressure. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I was about to put it into the ridge. But you didn't. You didn't let me. She looked at his arm. Torres, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. Okay. When the internal review asks you what happened in the cockpit, what are you going to tell them? He looked at her steadily. The truth, he said. I know that. I'm asking what the truth looks like to you. He was quiet for a moment, thinking, not stalling. I was losing the aircraft, he said. I knew I was losing it, I didn't have a solution. And then there was someone in the left seat who had a solution and who flew the aircraft when I couldn't. He paused. That's what happened. They may ask about authorization, whether you consented to. I slid over, he said. I gave up the seat. That was my decision. He looked at her with something direct in it. Are they going to try to make that into something it wasn't? Someone might try, she said. He shifted again. The arm clearly hurt when he moved, and he'd stopped trying to hide it, which she respected. Then I'll tell them what I just told you, he said, because that's what happened, and I'm not going to dress it up different for somebody's political convenience. She looked at him. You're going to be fine, she said, and meant the arm, and also the other thing. Yeah. He looked at the window. Miss Dalton, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Sloan said you used to fly military, rotary. Yes. Special operations aviation. Yes. He turned his head back to her. What made you stop? She'd answered this question twice in the last 12 hours. Each time it had taken something. She looked at Torres in his hospital bed with his broken arm and his pale face and thought about what he'd done in that cockpit. The specific courage of staying with a losing aircraft and holding it until the last second, which was a thing you only did if you understood what happened to the people behind you if you didn't. A mission went wrong, she said. The way I handled it was right. I still couldn't get back in the cockpit after. Why not? Because being right wasn't the same as being okay, she said. I needed time to learn the difference. He thought about that. 6 years is a long time. It is. Is it different now? After last night? She looked at the window. The desert light was full now, no longer coming in at an angle. Direct, flat, honest. Ask me in a week, she said. He nodded. She stood. She put the chair back. Ms. Dalton, he said. She stopped. Thank you, he said. For the left seat. She looked at him for a moment. Take care of the arm, she said. She left. The room for the internal review was better appointed than the room Carver had put her in. An actual conference table, actual chairs, a secure terminal in the corner. Falcon Reach was not a large outpost, but it had the necessary infrastructure for this kind of process. She suspected the room had been used for exactly this kind of thing before. Fenn was already there when she arrived at 1358. Marcus Fenn was 51, with a specific grooming of someone for whom appearance was professional armor. Not vain, strategic. He had a tablet and a paper folder and a recording device and a glass of water, all arranged with the particular deliberateness of someone who liked the arrangement of a table to communicate something before a word was spoken. He looked up when she came in. Miss Dalton, thank you for your time. Marcus, she said. She sat down across from him. She didn't adjust anything on her side of the table. Harlan was in the room, against the far wall, in the role of senior oversight, a separate recording device on his side. He looked at her when she sat, and his face said nothing useful. A woman she didn't recognize sat to Fenn's left, 30s, dark hair, a tablet of her own. Fenn's deputy, she guessed. The kind of person who came to these things to document. Let's get through this, Fenn said. He opened the paper folder. For the record, this is an internal operational review of the incident at grid reference. He read it. On the date, involving intelligence contractor Dalton Rhea E. and the unauthorized use of restricted overhead surveillance assets in support of a military operation outside the scope of her transit authorization. Noted, she said. You don't dispute the characterization? I dispute the word unauthorized, she said. Everything else is accurate. Fenn made a note. Let's start with the asset access. Walk me through the authorization basis. She had prepared for this. Not because the authorization was complicated, but because Fenn would want it complicated. Would look for the gap in the language, the ambiguity in the authority reference. She walked him through it cleanly. The standing authority she'd been granted 18 months ago, the operational parameters, the specific provision that allowed asset access in life safety emergencies at her discretion. That provision, Fenn said, applies to network protection, protecting the network from compromise. It applies to life safety emergencies affecting personnel associated with the network or adjacent operations, she said. The language is specific and I can provide the full text. I have the full text. He pulled a page from the folder, read from it. Life safety emergency involving network personnel or assets under active protection. He looked up. The military operators on that helicopter were not network personnel. They were adjacent operations. That's a generous interpretation. It's the accurate interpretation, she said. The asset was used to provide threat tracking during an extraction under fire. The alternative was allowing an active hostile ground element to overrun a position containing personnel whose proximity to my network was already a security concern. Fenn looked at her. Explain that. The insertion compromised because someone knew the corridor, she said. That means there was either a signals intercept of the routing or a source inside the planning process. Either way, there's a counterintelligence angle to the incident that connects directly to my network's operational security. Using the asset to protect the extraction protected the network's security perimeter. Fenn was quiet for a moment. She watched him work through it, looking for the seam in the logic, not finding one. That argument, he said finally, was not in your incident report. The incident report covered the tactical sequence. This is the review where I expand on the strategic rationale. Conveniently, accurately, she said. He set the page down. He picked up his tablet. I want to discuss the cockpit, he said. She waited. You took control of a military aircraft, he said. Without a current military authorization, without a flight physical in, he checked the tablet, 6 years, without the consent of the flight crew. The co-pilot gave up the left seat voluntarily, she said. I have his statement. He was compromised. Blood in his eye, possible concussion, fighting a failing aircraft. His ability to give meaningful consent. He's given a full statement this morning, she said. His arm is broken and his cognition is intact. He consented. He said so clearly. Fenn moved on without conceding. Your flight qualifications are lapsed. Any certification you held, skills don't lapse, she said. Legally, the aircraft was going to hit the ridge, she said. I don't know what statute you want to apply to that. I'm not applying a statute, Fenn said, with the careful tone of someone reminding themselves to stay procedural. I'm establishing the factual record of your qualifications and authorization at the time of the event. Then establish it accurately. My qualifications? I hold the full skill set for rotary wing special operations aviation. I flew for 9 years at the highest operational level available in that field. Those skills are intact, as the event demonstrates. She paused. My certification is lapsed because I chose not to renew it. That's different from the skills being lapsed. The regulatory difference is relevant in a courtroom, she said, not in a falling helicopter. Fenn put the tablet down. He looked at her with the specific expression of someone who had not expected this particular resistance and was recalculating. She'd seen the expression before. She'd seen it from people with more skill than Fenn, and she'd learned how to read the moment when a person shifted from probing to something else. He opened the paper folder to a different page. She knew what it was before he spoke. I want to discuss the incident 6 years ago, he said. The operational context that preceded your transition to intelligence work. The room was quiet in a specific way. Harlan, against the wall, was very still. That incident is classified at a level above this review, she said. I have current authorization. To read it, she said. Not to use it as evidence in an operational review without a separate authorization from the level that classified it. Fenn looked at her. He looked at the page. He looked at his deputy, who was looking at her tablet. The authorization to use it in review proceedings, he started, is a separate authorization, she said. Did you get it? A pause. The process is ongoing. Then it's not authorized for use in this meeting, she said. You can put it in the folder. Fenn looked at the page for a moment. He put it back in the folder. She breathed once, carefully, through her nose. Ms. Dalton, he said, let me be direct about what I'm seeing. Please, she said. I'm seeing a pattern, he said. A pattern of operational decisions made unilaterally, outside formal authorization structures, under pressure. I'm seeing an asset access model built on personal relationships rather than institutional frameworks. And I'm seeing an individual who has, twice in the history I can review, made significant unilateral decisions in crisis conditions that produced outcomes she defines as acceptable. He paused. The question isn't whether the outcomes were good. The question is whether the method is sustainable and controllable. She looked at him for a long time. Marcus, she said, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it as information rather than argument. He waited. The network I run produces intelligence that has contributed to 9 significant operations in this region in the last 4 years, she said. 3 of those operations directly prevented attacks on military and civilian targets. The value of the network is not incidental to the method. It is produced by the method. The trust relationships, the operational discretion, the absence of a 30-day review cycle, these aren't bugs in the system. They're why the system works. Every case officer says that about their network, Fenn said. And sometimes they're right, she said. You're supposed to evaluate which cases those are. That's your job. He was quiet. The question of whether the method is sustainable and controllable, she continued, has 2 possible answers. One is that you restructure the network into your framework, lose the trust relationships, lose the asset quality, and in 18 months you have a network that produces less valuable intelligence through a more auditable process. That's controllable. She paused. The other is that you establish a clear authorization structure around the existing method, one that defines the boundaries of my discretion rather than eliminating it, and the network continues to function. You're proposing to negotiate the terms of your own oversight, Fenn said. I'm proposing to have an adult conversation about what works, she said. Yes. Fenn looked at Harlan for the first time since the meeting started. Harlan, against the wall with his arms crossed and his paper cup of long cold coffee, looked back at Fenn with the specific neutrality of someone who has made a decision and is waiting for the room to catch up to it. The wing commander's proposal, Harlan said. Dressels, you've read it. Fenn hadn't expected Harlan to speak. He shifted. The joint role proposal. Yes. That proposal structurally resolves the authorization ambiguity, Harlan said. If Dalton operates within a defined joint aviation intelligence framework with clear authority parameters, the discretionary access issue has a documented basis. He paused. Which is what you actually need for your compliance record, Marcus. Not fewer operations, a cleaner paper trail. Fenn looked at the table. He looked at his deputy. He looked at his folder. That proposal requires a full security review, he said. Schedule it, Harlan said, and a medical evaluation. She'll complete it, Harlan said. He looked at Rhea. She looked back at him. She'll complete it, she said. Fenn was quiet for a moment that stretched in the specific direction of a man who has come into a room with a plan and is leaving with a different one and is deciding whether he can call it a victory. She watched him decide. The asset access, he said. For the purposes of this review, I'll accept the life safety emergency basis. But I want an addendum to the authorization language filed with my office within 30 days that explicitly defines the operational parameters. Done, she said. The cockpit incident will be documented as an emergency assumption of control under exigent circumstances with crew consent. I'll note the lapse certification and flag it for the medical and qualification review under the new framework. Fine, she said. And the classified incident file, he paused, remains in the file. She looked at him. Yes, she said, it does. He closed the folder. He picked up the recording device and stopped it. This review is closed pending the security and medical processes. He stood. His deputy stood. Ms. Dalton. Marcus, she said. He left. His deputy followed. She sat at the conference table in the empty room. Harlan came forward from the wall. He set his paper cup down on the table and sat in the chair Fenn had vacated, which she thought was probably deliberate. That was well handled, he said. It was messy, she said. Most things are. He looked at the closed folder still sitting on the table. He wasn't wrong about the pattern, you know. I know. You do make unilateral decisions under pressure. I know, Harlan. And the outcomes have been good, but the outcomes being good doesn't mean the method is right, she said. I know. I've been thinking about it for 6 years. He looked at her. And I think the method needs a better framework around it, she said. Not less discretion. A more honest accounting of what the discretion is and when it applies. Dressels' proposal. Dressels' proposal is a place to start, she said. It's not perfect. It'll need work. Most things do. He looked at the cup. Rhea. The incident file, the one Fenn had. She was quiet. You've never talked to me about it, he said. In 6 years. No. Do you want to? She looked at the table, at the place where Fenn's folder had been, at the recording device that was off. Not today, she said. He nodded. Okay. Maybe. She stopped. Whenever, he said. No deadline. She nodded. Outside, through the wall, the outpost continued its low-frequency hum, generators and radios and the ordinary machinery of a place doing what it was built to do. She sat in it for a moment and let the quiet be quiet. Harlan, she said. Thank you. For coming. He picked up his cold coffee and looked at it. You would have handled it without me. Probably, she said. But I'm glad I didn't have to. He almost smiled. It was the closest she'd seen him get to it in 6 years. Get some sleep, he said. The security review starts tomorrow. She stood. She picked up her own folder. Hers, the one she'd brought in and not opened because she hadn't needed it. She looked at it for a moment. Harlan, she said, the joint roll. If the review clears it, it'll clear, he said. If it does. She looked at the door. I want to keep the network, the relationships, the structure, the way it runs. You'll have to negotiate that. I know. Dressel seems reasonable. He does. She paused. And I want the aviation component to be real, not ceremonial, not a title that means I consult on flight planning. Harlan looked at her. Something in his face shifted. The same kind of shift she'd seen in Sloane's face at the cockpit door. The shift of a person updating their understanding of someone they thought they knew. You want to fly again, he said. She stood at the door with her folder. I already did, she said. She walked out into the corridor and the outpost wrapped around her, and the afternoon was bright through the exterior door at the end of the passage, and she walked toward it. The afternoon light hit the concrete apron full and flat, and without apology, the kind of desert light that didn't negotiate. She stood in it for a moment outside the side door and let it be what it was. Her hand still hurt, the right one especially, deep in the tendons. She'd been ignoring it since the medical bay, and she kept ignoring it now because there was nothing useful to do about it yet. And she'd learned a long time ago that acknowledging pain before you had a plan for it was just suffering with extra steps. She was standing there when Sloane found her. She was starting to notice that he found her, not in a pursuing way, more the way a compass finds north, some habitual orientation she didn't think he was fully aware of. He came around the corner of the building with his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes slightly squinted against the glare, and he stopped when he saw her, like he'd expected to find her somewhere, but not quite here. Review done? He asked. Done, she said. How'd it go? She thought about how to summarize 2 hours of Fenn and what it had cost and what it had produced. About how I expected, she said. He came and stood beside her in the light, not close, just beside. Carver told me Fenn was going to try to use the incident file. He did. And? He didn't have the authorization to use it in review proceedings, she said. He knew the rule. He came in anyway, hoping I wouldn't call it. Sloane was quiet for a moment. That's a risky play. It usually works, she said. People don't want to fight their own file. They'd rather let the meeting move on. But you called it. Yes. He looked at the helicopter pad. The crews were still working on the aircraft from last night, checking systems, running through the post-mission lists, the regular maintenance of things that had been used hard. What was in the file? He asked. The incident, 6 years ago. She'd been expecting the question. She'd been deciding, for the last hour, what shape her answer would take. I extracted a team from a position that was supposed to be unextractable, she said. Single aircraft, night, active hostile presence, LZ that wasn't really an LZ. She paused. I got everyone out. That sounds like a good outcome. It was. She looked at the light on the concrete. The pilot beside me didn't make it. He was hit on the approach. I flew out with him still in the seat. She paused. His name was Darren Colt. He'd been flying with me for 2 years. Sloane didn't say anything. The review cleared me on everything, she said. The decisions, the approach, the extraction, all of it by the book, or close enough. Nobody questioned it. She paused. I questioned it for a long time. Whether you made the right calls. Whether I made them for the right reasons, she said. Whether I pushed the approach the way I pushed it because it was the best option or because she stopped, found the word, certain, whether certainty is the same as being right. Were they the same? That time, yes, she said. But certainty doesn't know how to distinguish between the times it's right and the times it isn't. It just feels the same. She looked at him. That's what scared me off the cockpit, not the outcome, the certainty. He held her eyes. And tonight? Tonight, I wasn't certain about anything, she said. I just did the math and made the calls and hoped the math was right. It was right. Yes. She looked away. That's different from being certain it would be. That distinction matters to me. He was quiet for a while. The crew chiefs on the pad moved around their aircraft with flashlights and checklists, doing the patient work of people who trusted process over intuition. She watched them. Ben's going to file a supplementary complaint, Sloan said. After the review, I heard from Carver. I know. It won't go anywhere. Harlan will bury it. Harlan will route it appropriately, she said, which is different from burying it. He doesn't bury things. Is that a problem? No, she said. It's why I trust him. Sloan shifted his weight. She'd noticed he did that when he was working toward something. A small physical reorganization that preceded the thing he actually wanted to say. The joint roll, he said. Dressel's proposal. I'm going through the review process, she said. Medical tomorrow, security the day after. And you're going to take it. She looked at him. Probably. Is probably the honest answer. She thought about it. Yes and no, she said. The yes is that I want the work, the structure of it, the authorization clarity, being able to use what I know without having to perform helplessness first. She paused. The no is that I've been invisible for 6 years and visible has costs I remember. What costs? Accountability, she said. People knowing what you can do means people putting you in the position to do it. And sometimes you fail, and sometimes people get hurt. That happens in the dark too, he said. I know. She looked at her wrapped hands. In the dark, when it happens, nobody watched. He was quiet for a moment. Then, for what it's worth, I watched tonight. Everything you did. He paused. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't wrong about you at the start, but from the cockpit door forward, I watched. She looked at him. And? She said. And I'd fly with you again, he said, if you were flying. A pause. Or beside you. However the role works out. She held that for a moment. Not sentimentally. She was just letting it be accurate instead of deflecting it. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. He started to go. Sloan, she said. He stopped. The team, she said. They all went home. He turned back. His face did something she didn't have an easy name for. Something between acknowledgement and grief and the specific gratitude of a person who hasn't let themselves feel it yet because there's still process to finish. Yeah, he said. They did. That's because of every person on that riverbed, she said, including you. He stood there for a moment. Including you? He said. He went. The medical evaluation was at 800 the next morning. She slept 7 hours before it. Not well, not badly. The specific quality of sleep that comes after the body has decided it's safe enough to shut down properly. She woke once at 300 from something she couldn't remember, and lay in the dark of the small room they'd given her and listened to the outpost, and felt the right hand aching and let herself feel it this time instead of filing it away. Then she went back to sleep. The flight surgeon's name was Dr. Amara Seltz, and she was efficient in the way that people who do many evaluations become efficient, not impersonal, just organized. She had Ria's history on her screen and she worked through it systematically, which Ria appreciated. No performance, no commentary, just the work. The hand was the issue. Seltz looked at the imaging and made a sound that wasn't quite concern. The tendons in the right hand took significant strain, she said. You're looking at 4 to 6 weeks of physical therapy before I'd certify you for flight ops. 4 weeks or 6? Seltz looked at her over the imaging. Depends on how seriously you do the therapy. 4 weeks, Ria said. That's not a negotiation, Seltz said. That's a benchmark. You hit the benchmarks, you get the certification. You don't? It's 6. You push it and injure yourself. It's longer. I understand. You're also showing signs of cumulative fatigue, Selt said. Not from last night specifically. From the last, she looked at the file. From a pattern over the last several months. Sleep disruption, elevated cortisol markers from the blood work. You've been running hard for a long time. Ria looked at the wall. The work requires it. I understand that, Selt said. I'm not telling you to stop working. I'm telling you that what you're showing me is a body that's been running on reserves for a while, and the reserves aren't unlimited. She paused. The joint roll, if it involves field operations as well as aviation, it will. Then you need to build sustainable rhythms into it, not as a lifestyle choice, as a professional requirement. Seltz looked at her. I'll file a conditional clearance, full clearance pending the hand therapy milestones. The condition is a mandatory 30-day reduced operational tempo after the therapy clears. Ria started to say something. Non-negotiable, Seltz said. That one actually isn't. She looked at the doctor. Seltz looked back with the flat patience of someone who had said non-negotiable to people with considerably more authority than Ria and had not moved. Fine, Ria said. Good. Seltz made a note. The therapy starts here before you leave Falcon Reach. I'll set you up with the physical therapist this afternoon. He's going to give you exercises and you're going to do them. I understand. Ms. Dalton? Seltz set down her stylus. For what it's worth, the imaging on your right hand shows the pattern of someone who flew that helicopter to its absolute limit and then passed it. The strain distribution is consistent with extreme sustained input load under high resistance. She paused. You saved people with that hand. It's worth knowing the cost and accounting for it properly. Ria looked at the hand. It was still wrapped, the tape slightly loose now from 2 days of wear. She'd rewrap it tonight. I know the cost, she said. I believe you, Seltz said. That's why I'm telling you to do the therapy. The security review took a day and a half. She sat with 2 analysts she hadn't met before in a room with a secure terminal and walked through the network. Not its contents, not its sources, not the names or locations or access points. The architecture. The decision logic. The way she'd built it and why she'd built it the way she had. They asked good questions. She answered them honestly where she could, and told them where the boundaries were when she hit them, and they accepted the boundaries without pushing, which meant they were serious and not trying to catch her at something. On the second day late afternoon, one of the analysts, a woman named Okafor, mid-40s, the kind of precise that came from years of pattern recognition, leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The asset you use for overhead coverage, she said. The passive feed. Yes. It's not in any of our registries. No, Ria said. It wouldn't be. Can you tell me what it is? No. Okafor looked at her, not hostile, genuinely curious. Is it ours? Ria thought about how to answer that. It's aligned with our interests, she said carefully. The relationship predates any formal structure. It's been productive and it hasn't created exposure problems. Until this week. The exposure this week was contained, she said. The asset is intact. But now we know it exists. Okafor paused. Which means Fen knows it exists. Fen knows something exists, Ria said. He doesn't know what. He's going to keep pulling on it. Let him pull, she said. He'll find the authorization framework and it'll refer him to a level he can't access. And he'll file a complaint that goes into a review process that produces a finding that says the asset is within operational parameters. Okafor studied her. You've thought about this. I've thought about it for 6 years, she said. Okafor nodded slowly. She made a note. The review will clear, she said. I can tell you that informally. The architecture is sound. The risk management is better than most of what I see from case officers with twice your operational budget. Thank you. It's an observation, not a compliment. But the corner of Okafor's mouth moved slightly. The joint role framework is going to require you to bring more of this into formal documentation. Not the sources, the logic, the decision trees. I know. That's going to be uncomfortable. Most useful things are, Ria said. Okafor closed her tablet. We're done, she said. The formal finding goes to Dressel and Harlan by end of week. Thank you, Ria said again. She meant it more the second time. She found Deke on the evening of the second day. Sitting on a low concrete wall near the motor pool with his bandaged hand in his lap and a cold energy drink he wasn't drinking. He looked up when she approached and moved over slightly in the way that meant she could sit if she wanted to. She sat. They were quiet for a moment. The motor pool was busy, vehicles coming in from a day rotation, people moving around with the purposeful tiredness of end of shift. Diesel smell, grit, the low conversation of people wrapping up. "How's the hand?" she asked. "Surgeon says I'll keep all the fingers," he said. "Which is more than I expected, so..." He looked at it. 4 weeks light duty. "I have 4 weeks of physical therapy," she said. He looked at her sideways. "On the right hand?" "Yes." He made a sound, not quite a laugh. "We're a pair." She looked at the motor pool. "Deke, that night, when I told the team what was going to happen to the aircraft, you backed me up." "You were right," he said. "You didn't know that yet." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "But I could hear it, the hydraulic tone." He looked at his hand. "And you described the failure sequence exactly right. I've heard that failure before. Different aircraft, but..." He shrugged. "You knew what you were talking about, so I said so. Sloan listened because you said so." He looked at her. "Sloan listened because he's not an idiot. He needed 2 seconds to get there. I just shortened the 2 seconds." He paused. "You would have found another way if I hadn't." She thought about that. Maybe. Maybe not. Those 2 seconds had been the whole margin. "Either way," she said. "Thank you." He nodded. He picked up the energy drink and put it back down without drinking it. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "The phone," he said. "The overhead feed. How long have you been running that kind of asset?" "A while," she said, "and nobody official knows about it." "Someone official knows about it," she said. "Just not many people." He was quiet, processing that. "And now Fenn knows something exists." "Now Fenn knows something exists," she agreed. "Is that a problem?" She thought about Okafor's assessment, about the authorization framework and the review process, and the specific way that transparent structures, properly built, were more durable than hidden ones. "It's going to require some restructuring," she said. "But no, not a problem." He nodded. He looked at the motor pool. "Ms. Dalton?" "Rhea," she said. He looked at her, a small recalibration. "Rhea," he paused. "What you did in that cockpit. I've been in a lot of bad situations. I've seen people perform under pressure." He stopped, started again. "That was different." "How?" He thought about it. "Most people, when they're performing under pressure, you can see them performing. There's something effortful about it, visible." He turned the energy drink in his good hand. "You just did it, like it was the only thing that made sense to do." She looked at the wall across the motor pool, a faded stencil. "Maintain discipline. Maintain readiness." "It was the only thing that made sense to do," she said. "That's not skill, that's just clarity about the situation." "Most people don't have that clarity." "Most people haven't had 6 years to think about one decision," she said. "It changes your relationship with the next one." He was quiet with that. "You should drink that," she said, nodding at the energy drink. "It's terrible," he said. "Probably," she said. "Drink it anyway." He drank it. He made a face. She stood and left him there, and behind her she heard him make the face again at the second sip, and it was the most normal sound she'd heard in 3 days. The formal offer came from Dressel on the morning of the 3rd day. He sat across from her in his office, not the conference room, his actual office, which was smaller and less arranged than she'd expected and had a photograph on the wall of a terrain feature she recognized as somewhere in the northern mountains of Ashkar province. She wondered when he'd been there and under what circumstances. She didn't ask. He had a single sheet of paper, not a tablet, paper. She noticed that. "The security review cleared," he said. "Conditional clearance from medical, pending the therapy milestones." He looked at the paper. "The joint role, Aviation Intelligence Operations Specialist, operating under joint authority with a reporting line to both the Wing Operations Command and the Intelligence Oversight Structure. Harlan Voss has agreed to co-sign the authority framework." He looked up. "Which was not a given. He doesn't co-sign things easily." "No," she said. "He doesn't." The role carries full aviation certification reinstatement contingent on medical clearance, access to the appropriate airframes for the operational requirements, and, he paused, operational discretion within defined parameters. The parameters are in the framework document. They're broader than what Fen wanted and narrower than what you currently operate with. I've read the framework document, she said. I know you have. Harlan sent it to you last night. Harlan sent it to me 2 hours after I told him I was interested, she said. He'd already drafted it. Dressel almost smiled. He had input, he said diplomatically. Are the parameters workable? She thought about the framework, the specific language around operational discretion, the authorization basis for asset access in defined emergency scenarios, the reporting requirements, more than she currently had, less than Fen had wanted. With one amendment, she said. Which one? The 30-day reduced tempo that CELTS mandated after the therapy clears, she said. I want that written into the framework as a standing operational recovery period after any high-intensity field deployment, not just this one, going forward. He looked at her. That's more restrictive than the standard language. I know, she said. I'm asking for it anyway. He studied the paper. You want a mandatory recovery window built into your own operational structure. I want a sustainable pace built into the framework, she said. Not because I need someone to manage me, because I've watched what happens to people who don't build it in, and I've been one of those people, and I'm not doing it again. He looked at her for a moment with the quality of assessment she'd seen from him before, not doubting, calibrating. I'll add the language, he said. She nodded. Ria. He set the paper down. I want to ask you something that's not in the framework document. She waited. 6 years is a long time to stay out of a cockpit, he said, and the night you came in, you flew a crippled aircraft through a canyon under fire and put it down in a dry riverbed with no engines and everyone alive. He paused. That's not someone who needed 6 years to recover their skills. No, she said. So what were the 6 years for? She looked at the photograph on his wall. The northern mountains. She'd been in those mountains years ago, in the dark, with a different aircraft and a different team and a set of decisions that she'd had to live inside for a very long time before she could live outside them. Permission, she said. I needed permission. From who? She looked at him. From myself. He was quiet for a moment. And now? And now I flew a helicopter, she said. So, he picked up the paper. He slid it across the desk. She looked at it. The language was precise, institutional, the specific vocabulary of authority and accountability. Her name in the relevant field, the signature lines at the bottom, Dressel, Harlan, a third line that was hers. She picked up the pen on the desk. It was a regular pen, the kind that was always slightly dry when you needed it. She pressed harder and the ink came. She signed. She left Falcon Reach on a clear morning 4 days after she'd arrived with blood on her head and riverbed grit under her fingernails in the back of a dying helicopter. She left in the passenger seat of a scheduled transport, which was a thing she found briefly funny and didn't explain to the young airman driving her to the flight line. Her bag was in the back. Her hand was wrapped properly this time. Fresh tape. The physical therapist's first session 2 hours behind her, and a set of exercises in her jacket pocket that she was going to do correctly because she'd said she would, and because her word to herself was the only currency that actually mattered. The Kestrel operation was back on, 72 hours delayed and restructured with additional overhead coverage. Her network's coverage, now formally documented in the operational plan with the appropriate authorization trail. She'd spent the last day rebuilding the operational approach with cleaner parameters. It was better than what she'd had before. She hadn't enjoyed admitting that, but she'd admitted it. At the flight line, she found 3 of them waiting: Sloan, Deke, Adebayo. Not in any official capacity. They weren't in uniform. They weren't carrying anything formal. Just standing near the terminal building in the morning light with the particular ease of people who have decided to be somewhere and don't need a reason beyond that. She stopped walking. Sloan looked at her. Safe flight? He said. Thank you, she said. Deke raised his bandaged hand. She raised her wrapped one. Some exchange passed between those two gestures that didn't require elaboration. Adebayo looked at her with the same steadiness he'd had in the dark with the long gun on the north slope. He hadn't said much to her in 3 days. He didn't say much now. He just looked at her with something in it. Not gratitude exactly, something more mutual than that. Recognition, maybe. The specific recognition of people who have been in the same dark at the same time and come out the other side. She nodded at him. He nodded back. She picked up her bag and walked to the transport. At the stairs, she stopped. She turned back. They were still standing there. She didn't wave, they didn't wave. She just looked at them for a moment in the clear desert morning. The three of them standing outside a terminal building at an outpost at the edge of terrain that had tried to kill all of them 4 nights ago, and felt the specific weight of what that meant and let it mean it without deflecting. Then she turned and went up the stairs. The transport was a small twin-engine, 7 seats, the kind of efficient utility aircraft that flew the routes that larger planes couldn't justify. She took a window seat on the right side and put her bag in the overhead and sat down and buckled her belt. The co-pilot came back to do a head count and saw her hand and started to say something about whether she needed assistance. "I'm fine," she said. He looked at her hand, at her face, at the way she was sitting. He made a small recalibration the way people did when they looked at her properly. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and went back to the cockpit. The engine started. The right one first, then the left. The specific sequence of it, the familiar vibration through the airframe. She put her hand flat on the armrest and felt it. Not afraid. Not certain either. Just present. Just here. In this seat. On this aircraft. With this hand on this armrest. On her way to the work that was waiting and the framework that would hold it properly now, and the version of herself that had spent 6 years hiding from the person she used to be, finally, quietly, accepting that the person she used to be and the person she'd become in the hiding were both real and both hers, and neither one of them had to disappear for the other one to exist. The transport rolled. The desert opened up outside the window. The mountains of Ashkar province were visible to the north, huge and indifferent, the same mountains they'd threaded through in the dark 4 nights ago in a helicopter that was dying. She looked at them. They looked like mountains. The aircraft lifted. Below, Falcon Reach shrank to its geometry. The walls, the pads, the antenna clusters, the ordinary shape of a place that stayed awake because the work required it. She watched it until it was just a pale mark in the desert, and then until it was nothing. And then she looked at the mountains, and then at the sky above them, which was very clear and very blue, and went up a long way. She settled back in the seat. Her hand still hurt. The physical therapy exercises were in her pocket. She took them out and read through them, not because she didn't remember, but because she'd said she would do this correctly, and doing something correctly started with reading the instructions even when you thought you didn't need to. She folded the paper, put it back. Outside, the sky was enormous, and the desert was enormous, and somewhere below the flight path her network was intact, and the work was waiting, and the framework was signed, and the certification was conditional, and the hand would heal in 4 weeks if she did the work. It wasn't clean. None of it was clean. It was real, which was what she had, which was what she'd always had, and which she had finally decided was enough. She looked out the window at the sky going past and let the vibration of the engine settle into her like something familiar returning. Never mistake quiet strength for helplessness, and never mistake the scars someone carries for proof that they've stopped.